Robert. Let's bring Robert up. Okay. Hi, Robert.
Hello. Hi, Armin. How are you?
Good.
I had a question about...
How are you?
But first,
yes, go on.
I needed to inform you of something. Do you remember last week on the show, this one caller complained that there was no evidence for the existence of Alexander the Great?
Oh, yeah, I remember. I was going to say,
no,
I don't remember that because, but I do remember that, yes. It wasn't last week. It was way before.
I'm sorry, what?
It wasn't last week, but it was like, yes, we're there. Can you hear us?
Maybe 2 weeks.
Robert?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe it was about 2 weeks ago.
Yes. Okay.
But do you remember the incident? Do you remember,
yes, I do.
Remember the event I'm talking?
Yes, but let's get through this very fast because I'm interested in what you called about. So go on, Robert.
Yeah, it's just something I wanted to let you know because this theist caller said there's no evidence for Alexander the Great. This is after you mentioned, there's no evidence for Jesus. Well, the caller was lying because we have plenty of archaeological evidence. We have the Shrine of the Bark at Luxor, which is in Egypt, which mentions Alexander by name, and we have a Greek, a Mesopotamian tablet, which also mentions him by name. And I wanted you to know.
Yes, I think we addressed that. By the way, I just want to clarify. I didn't say there's no evidence for Jesus. That was my co-host. We had slightly different arguments for it. But let's move on. Let's move into what you said in your question. I have a question about the Quran. But go on. What's the question about the Quran?
Okay, let's go to the Quran. All right.
Okay.
Let me just make an introductory sentence because the Quran is about a 7th century work. Now, comparing that the language, like the English of the 7th century, is nothing like the English now. To understand it, you have to take courses and everything like that. The language has changed so radically. My question is, has the Arabic, the 7th century Arabic, in which the Quran is written in, has that changed considerably over the 1,000 or so years?
It has changed, but not that radically, right? So if you
something like with the dots or something. Sorry to interrupt. I just was reading something about this. Yeah, I was just reading.
Actually, if you go that far back, then it has changed. Depends on how far back you want to go, right? Because if you want to go to the Arabic language, go on.
I'm talking about the 6th century when the Quran was ostensibly written.
Okay, so this whole idea of the Quran being written when Muslim narratives claims they're written, that's being questioned. It seems like it was much more like a longer period of time that is even pre-Islamic, right? So the Quran is like a much more the evolution of the Quran is a lot more complicated than what Muslim narratives say, right? So it seemed like it came from other languages. The early Arabic languages were closer, like an offshoot of Syriac, but I'm not going to go into the details. But if you see, here's the thing: just like evolution of living beings, it's hard for you to put a line exactly on where the Arabic starts and when the other languages that the Arabic came from ends, right? So it's not like a black and white line that you could say like, okay, Arabic starts here. So for you to say how has it changed a lot depends on how far back you go, because if you go back. Any language, the evolution of any language, if you keep going back, at some point you don't recognize it as the language that we call it Arabic today. But is it if it changed that much, is it by definition still Arabic, or is it Proto-Arabic, or is it early Arabic, or is it the late stages of Syriac? Like, so it's hard for you to, depends on how you define Arabic. But Arabic
it reminds me of like the when is you take a grain from a sand, like when is it no longer a heap? Like when do you draw that kind of line, sort of thing.
Yes. But so early Arabic did not like JMike mentioned, very early Arabic didn't even have the signs that you have for the dialectic marks and the dots, right? So it would be unreadable for an Arab-speaking person today because they could not tell the difference between a letter that makes the b sound or the letter that makes the t sound, or Z sound versus the R sound. So it would be almost impossible to read. So it has changed that much. But to be fair to Muslims, eventually when Arabic was developed as a more a language that was used more commonly, it hasn't. Arab-speaking people right now, they have an easier time reading the Quran after the dots and the dialectic marks were added. They have an easier time figuring out how to read the Quran than English-speaking people required to understand Shakespeare. It's still difficult because the Arabic in the Quran is still different from the Arabic that is spoken today, but you wouldn't need as much training as an English person requires today to be able to read Shakespeare. So the difference is less. Does that answer your question?
Because Shakespeare, 16th century, which is 1,000 years later. Okay, let me ask the question in a different way. And you've partially answered. Your average Muslim is basically reading a modernized version of the Quran. Is that correct?
Well, depends on how you define modernized, because the dots and the dialectic marks were added very early on in the Islamic history. So technically, it's pretty close. There are some very small differences where a lot of Muslims would deny, but there are some small differences. But overall, it has stayed pretty much the same since the late Umayyad dynasty, since like early on in the Islamic history till now. It hasn't changed that much. It has changed a little and not that much. I also have to add that most Muslims don't speak Arabic at all. So when you say Muslims, you're talking about 20% of the Muslim population who speak Arabic, because the vast majority of Muslims are not Arabs.
Okay, but the Quran, the language it's written in, isn't that called Arabic?
Yes.
Okay, so I did use the right term there. Now, but and by the way, Shakespeare is more the modern English period. Let me correct you there. Beowulf
say anything about
is Old English.
Okay.
Beowulf is Old English.
Okay.
For example,
I didn't make a claim about Shakespeare.
Those to understand that. Of course, Beowulf is written in an unusual dialect. You have to go to school and you have to learn a foreign language. Shakespeare you can pick up. Some of it's a little strange, but a modern speaker could. But now let me ask you, with a modern, let's say you have a modern Muslim, when he hears a passage in the Quran, he can immediately understand it. Let's say he's not very well schooled, but he goes to his house of worship and he hears a modern, and he hears somebody reading from the Quran. Will he understand it?
Well, like I said, most Muslims are not Arab speakers. You're talking about Arab Muslims? So most Muslims would not understand. Most Muslims will have no clue. The vast majority of Muslims, if you read them the Quran, they would need a translation in their language.
That's what I thought. That's what I'm getting at. Now, my next question, just based on your answer, is what are most modern Muslims read? What do most modern Muslims read or listen to when they hear the Quran? Isn't it a modernized version?
Okay, okay. So Muslims listen to the Quran for different reasons. If you just listen to the Arabic, it's not necessarily for you to understand what it's saying. It's a good thing to do. Just listening to the Quran, reciting the Quran, gives you brownie points with Allah, even if you have no clue what the words are saying. So that's why a lot of times the Muslims will listen to the Arabic words or read the Arabic words without understanding it. But if you want to actually understand it, the vast majority of the Muslims have to read the translation. So the translation of the Quran, yes, it's a modern thing, because in the vast majority of the history of Islam, the Quran was not translated into different languages. The access to the translation, being this prevalent, it's a modern thing. So Muslims speak Urdu, they speak Persian, they speak Malay. These are the languages that are common among Muslims. Arabic is just 20%. It is one of the big ones up there, but it's not the majority. So when Muslims want to understand the Quran, they just read the translation. The vast majority of them will just read the translation of the Quran in their own.
That's what I had thought. That they're reading. Okay, because the original language is Arabic. Now, here's my question: is this? Is there just one modernized Arabic translation, or are there a number of them floating around?
Oh, there's many. Like, for example, my mother tongue is Persian. I grew up in Iran, right? So when we read the Quran, we don't understand the Arabic of the Quran. As Iranians, as Iranian Muslims, we wouldn't understand the Quran. We had to read the Persian translation. There are competing translators. There are many Persian translators, and they're competing with each other. So we have access, and sometimes they are quite different. The translations are quite different in their meaning.
That's my whole point. Yes, they can be quite different. We have the same problems in English. You know, when things like, for example, in Old English get translated into modern English, they're quite different. Do you understand what I'm getting at? Okay,
yes, I think so.
That's all I really asked, because I like to study the languages that the books are written in, and that tells you a lot about the book, doesn't it?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. I host a Persian show for Iranian people and people from Tajikistan and Afghanistan and anyone else who speaks Persian. What we do is, when we are, like, this is an atheist channel for Persian-speaking people, and when we are studying the Quran, we have all the translations next to each other, and we look at all the translations in Persian. And it's interesting how some of the translations are biased towards their ideology, and like their translation reflects their bias, and some other translations reflect their bias. So that's something that we commonly have to deal with ex-Muslim, Persian-speaking ex-Muslims, when we're analyzing and dissecting the Quran.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay.
And I understand perfectly. I just simply wanted to ask you. I didn't realize that you spoke Farsi, because we have a number of words from the Farsi language. Did you know that in English?
We do. Okay. Yes. Like star, like officer, like train, like divine. Yes, I know that. But anyways, we need to. Do you have any? Well, it's Indo-European, which is basically the same root. It has the same root of Persian. But anyways, I don't want to get into this much detail because I think we might lose people. But anyways, do you have any other final messages before we go to the next caller, Robert?
That's it. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you.